Hello, everybody. Welcome to Angels of Creation podcast. I'm your host, Cristian Mastrodonato. In this podcast, I bring together my knowledge in complex systems with my experience in leading technology innovation and new product development to explore how successful product, organizations, and ideas emerge. Greetings from the Italian Maritime Alps. Apologies if you might hear in the background the sounds of freshwater springs or birds singing. But while I'm working on an incredible lineup of interviews that will be available to you over the coming months, I thought, why don't share some ideas on what to read and listen during this vacation period? I'm sure many of you, as I do, take advantage of the summer break to refresh your minds with new and interesting ideas. So, in addition to all the interesting episodes that Angels of Creation offers you, and please share this podcast to anyone you think might enjoy it, here's some of the interesting ideas that I've been recently discovering and I'm happy to share with you. So, let's go! The first reading worth to share is a long-standing friend sitting on my bedside table, Epictetus. I've been slowly reading his complete works for quite some time now, and while, at least for my personal preference, it does cater for an occasional deep reading of one of his discourses versus a single gulp of all his writings, the summer is usually a period where I can spend a bit more time in company of these old friends. For the ones, many possibly, who never heard of him, he's one of the main representatives of the Late Stoics, that is, the ones mainly active during the Roman Empire period. Others being Marcus Aurelius and Seneca, who, by the way, was a man. Personally, I'm reading the complete works, but I'd say if anybody is interested, should at least look at its discourses. His teachings really force the reader to think deeply about what she often takes for granted, that is, what she can control, and therefore really matters, and what she can't, and therefore shouldn't bother with. Just to give a taste, one passage that deeply resonated with me lately was, "Why do you not know, then, that the origin of all human evils and of baseness and of cowardice is not death, but rather the fear of death?" I've compared this passage discussing with a friend of mine, a real one, I mean not Epictetus, as a mic drop, very true and very uncomfortable. It is interesting to note how recently Stoic philosophy has had quite a renaissance, most likely one of the reasons this book has ended up in my reading list. And I believe Stoics have a lot to teach us, but to be honest, some recent interpretations of Stoicism are at least shallow, if not questionable. So my suggestion is to read the real ones and make up your own mind. If you tell me, as I probably could have said some years ago, philosophy books are hard and I don't really understand them, well, while I hope you're going to change your mind, I think you can absolutely start into Stoicism by reading Marcus Aurelius' Meditation. This might actually be the book that is going to change your mind about reading philosophy books. Written as a personal notebook not meant to be shared with others, is a very accessible treasure trove of deep thoughts and a great entry point to Stoicism. Give it a go and you won't regret it. Now, moving into more recent times, but still with an interesting time perspective, I'm in the midst of reading Life After Google by George Gilder, a book suggested to me by Jeff Skelton, ICS Managing Director. George Gilder is a very provocative writer with a very distinctive style. Why did I say the time perspective of this book is interesting? Well, this book has been written in 2010, and the main thesis of the book is that blockchain is a foundation of a new model of economy and society. Many people would therefore probably have dropped this book after 5 pages, since I think I'd be rich if I'd been given a penny every time I heard blockchain has failed over the last couple of years. But even assuming that blockchain did fail, that might be a conversation for another time with a proper expert as a guest. Many of the reasons because the big data business models are flawed and dangerous are still valid. Many of the reasons why economic and societal values enabled by blockchain can be a great options are still true. Whatever technology you want to use to build it, or not to use, as my previous guest, A.K. Yarvina, would argue. So I think this book is a useful refresher that we can build a different world if we want, even more useful in the days of huge data business models enabled by large language models and generative AI. Of course, it wouldn't be an Angels of Creation episode if we didn't mention complexity at least once. And I believe one of the foundational books of the modern definition of complexity is Stuart Kauffman's Atom in the Universe. The main scientific, possibly scientistic, thought school taught us to believe that the reason because we are here is solely due to Darwinian natural selection, which gives chance an incredibly important role in our existence. We are here because we are absurdly lucky, basically. A great book that explains very well this view is Chance and Necessity by Nobel Prize Jacques Monod, by the way. While there is a lesson to learn from it that we shouldn't discount, given human hubris and self-absorption is possibly killing this planet with us on it, the reality might be a bit more complex than that, pun intended. In fact, Kaufman posits that self-organization is a fundamental source of order in the universe, working alongside natural selection. This principle suggests that complex systems can spontaneously organize themselves without external direction, and this can explain the emergence of order and structure in biological systems and possibly beyond to societies and economies. Kaufman uses computer simulations and models to illustrate how systems can evolve to higher levels of complexity by balancing on the edge between order and chaos. This balancing behavior is often called self-organized criticality. This has very interesting implications. For example, systems with redundancy, multiple components performing similar functions, are more robust and can evolve gradually. This robustness allows for the stable accumulation of variations, facilitating the evolution of complex structures. I recommend to listen to my interview with Luca Dellanno on survival and adaptation to have another perspective on this issue. I think this is a great book that shows how complexity thinking can completely redefine our assumptions of the world. Closing about complexity readings, I've recently shared on LinkedIn, and I put a link to it in this episode description, to a very interesting article that defines anti-fragility very rigorously, but also very clearly. I know anti-fragility is a concept firstly introduced by Taleb that I often mention, so it is always good to be able to refer to proper definitions. Now, enough about readings, and why don't we rest our eyes? Tired of endless hours of screen work, and we listen to interesting conversations instead? Maybe while driving on a road trip or laying on a beach or looking at a beautiful landscape. Okay, you're also using your eyes in this case, but then should they be relaxing? So it doubles the effect, I guess. I like to think you're doing it right now since you're listening to this episode. As usual, don't forget to hit the like button, to follow it and share it to your community, so they can also have interesting ideas for the summer. I will start my listening suggestion from a whole podcast to follow, and it is the Complexity Physics of Life podcast from the Santa Fe Institute for Complexity. Being run and curated by a scientific organization, it is definitely very deep, and in this sense very complementary to Engines of Creation, where we try to keep a more business and technology look at complexity. But whatever is your topic of interest, I'm sure you can find one or more episodes in this podcast that touches it from a complexity standpoint. It is worth a try if complexity is stimulating your curiosity by now. Going back to philosophy, but much more modern one, I thoroughly recommend the episode from Kurt Jamingel's Theories of Everything podcast, when Donald Hoffman and Stephen Wolfram discuss the respective theories of consciousness from Donald Hoffman and the Ruliad, which is a computational theory of the universe from Stephen Wolfram. The episode is 3 hours plus long, but if you want to have a good idea of what some of the most exciting and recent views of how our universe might look like, this is a great starter. An interesting fact is that these two theories have been developed completely independently, and it is the first time these two thinkers meet. I've been following them for quite some time, and I kept saying, these two guys should talk. For sure, I wasn't the only one, and in fact, eventually someone made them talk to each other. Finally, in a podcast that I've already recommended, Mindscape by Sean Carroll, there are 3 among the last episodes that stood out to me. The one with Google's researcher François Chollet on deep learning and large language models, which is a sobering and clear overview of the current situation, without marketing and sensationalism and with some honest reality checks instead. The one with Daron Acemoglu, very interesting for people working in innovation, showing the effect of technological innovation on society, not always that good apparently, and the importance of institutions to govern it. Finally, I really enjoyed Ellen Langer's interview on mindfulness and the body. She is great at explaining mindfulness beyond the usual confinement meditative practices and how it can be a powerful and transformative tool in our daily activities. I think that's all for today. Thanks for listening to this episode of Engines of Creation. I hope to have given you enough interesting sources for new ideas and inspirations, hoping that the rest of your summer is going to be relaxing, joyous, and full of new learnings. And if you want to learn even more, be sure to follow Engines of Creation and leave us a rating and a review. And don't hesitate to share this episode on social media and with friends and colleagues who might be interested. This podcast counts on you to grow and help other people to understand and embrace complexity, to innovate and create. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, feel free to reach out to engines of creation@mastrodonato.com. I'll be glad to continue the conversation.